Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly tropical weather outlook video for today, May 17th, Saturday, 2025. Let's start off with the countdown now till hurricane season in the Atlantic. We are 15 days away from that on June 1st when the Atlantic hurricane season begins, and obviously the Eastern Pacific hurricane season just began on Thursday. I did a video on that, so if you want to go look at it, it's on my YouTube channel. And if you're not subscribed, would really appreciate it if you subscribe so you can get more videos like this whenever I post them. But the Eastern Pacific hurricane season has already began. Now we're just left for the Atlantic hurricane season to begin, which it does so in 15 days. Let's take a look at the current sea surface temperature anomalies across the Atlantic and the Pacific. You notice in the Pacific, we still don't have any sort of overwhelming signal for El Nino and La Nina. And now that we're in mid-May and we're pretty much on the door of the Atlantic hurricane season beginning and the Eastern Pacific season already begun, we pretty much already know at this point that we will not have an El Nino for this year's hurricane season. It's pretty much a fact at this point, and that'll obviously have its implications in making potentially the Pacific less active and the Atlantic probably more active, especially when you see in the Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies are decently above normal. I mean, they're not overwhelmingly above normal like we saw last year where it was just records all over the place, but they're definitely warmer than normal. If you were to kind of compare how the Pacific looks to how the Atlantic looks, you could definitely see the Atlantic overall looks warmer than the Pacific does. So you would assume that there would be more rising motion focused in the Atlantic instead of more rising motion focused here if we were to have an El Nino, which in turn would kind of suppress the Atlantic. Things definitely look a little bit more in tipping the scale in favor towards the Atlantic this year, and hence we generally have the expectation that this year will be an above normal season. And so the Atlantic, pretty much throughout the entire MDR, through the Caribbean and the Gulf, which is especially important, and I'll continue to mention this because early on in the season, once we get towards June 1st, we don't automatically look towards the entire deep tropics producing activity. Early on in the season, especially June and July, we really only focus on the Western Atlantic, off of course in the Caribbean and the Gulf and off the southeast coast too, which is also right now very warm, especially, man, look at those anomalies right off the mid-Atlantic and northeast coasts. Very, very warm, probably 2 or 3 degrees Celsius above normal. This is where we look at for development early on in the season. We don't look out here towards the MDR. That's not till really late July or August where we start to see development typically. Although last year, obviously, we had Hurricane Beryl, which was a Category 5 in the Eastern Caribbean on literally the first day of July, although that's really an anomaly. We shouldn't really expect that to happen this year. But in general, watch the Western Atlantic, and I'll show you in just a little bit. We might have a chance to watch the Western Atlantic once we get into next month for development. And the Western Hemisphere as a whole, including the Eastern Pacific, we might finally be seeing our first signs of things beginning to get going in the tropics once we head towards the end of this month and into next month. But I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And once again, just reinforcing, no El Nino. Here's the Nino 3.4 anomalies, and you could see we're not heading towards rapidly warming up, especially not like we were in March. Quite a spike there we had in March, and then it crashed significantly, and then we've kind of seen a little bit of warming since then. The latest value, though, at pretty much near dead neutral, and we've also been declining over the last week or so with the Nino 3.4 bottom line. Really no sign of an El Nino once again. And we look at the SOI, and that pretty much reinforces that. Also had a little bit of a crash with the SOI. We were very strongly positive last month. This month we're now tipping into negative territory slightly. And if you look at the daily contributions, especially over the last 2 weeks or so, makes sense as to why the SOI kind of tanked quite a bit especially these values here, May 9th through May 11th, very strong negative values. But it looks like we're on a slight uptrend with the SOI now. As long as the SOI doesn't go strongly negative, really a sign that the atmosphere will not really, we're not really favored for an El Nino. Once again, in the latest daily contributions anyway, are in the positive territory. So even with the SOI, not much sign of an El Nino. And then just taking a look at the anomalies in the Pacific, in the subsurface. So pretty much, let's say we take this map here of the equatorial Pacific and we take a slice of it and look at it as a cross-section below the surface instead of what this map is, which is the anomalies at the surface, and also obviously showing the entire Pacific and the Atlantic. So what are the subsurface anomalies showing? Once again, too, with the subsurface, at least right closer to the surface here, you can see not much in the way of overwhelming warm or cold signals as well. We still have some of these leftover cold anomalies from when we did have a La Nina, obviously, earlier this year, although that's kind of gone away. And we do have some subsurface warmth here that's kind of stretching in from the Western Pacific and maybe is trying to make its way to the surface. But once again, as I showed you with the SOI, we're really not in any sort of strong El Nino state that's favoring strong westerly winds across the Pacific, which is allowing for downwelling Kelvin waves or downwelling Kelvin waves, which would allow for all this warmth to rapidly head eastward and make its way towards the surface and create an El Nino. That's not happening. And of course, now that we're in May and we're pretty much on the doorstep of the Atlantic hurricane season, you would imagine if we're not having any El Nino development now, that we're pretty much heading into the hurricane season with no major El Nino development. You would assume, even if an El Nino, I said this and I'll say it again, even if an El Nino does happen later this year, which I'm pretty sure we won't have it at this point, probably at all, it's probably not going to develop, excuse me, in time to really negatively affect the hurricane season as well. So pretty much hammering the fact in no El Nino this season, and it's pretty much a sure thing now. And yeah, that's pretty much it with ENSO and El Nino. There's really not much else to say other than we're not going to get an El Nino, at least a significant one that'll impact the hurricane season. Let's look at sea surface temperatures now. We looked at the anomalies, but what about the actual sea surface temperatures? And you can see we have, this is the 26 degrees Celsius line. It extends into a little bit of the Western MDR. Once again, the reason why we don't look out towards the Eastern Atlantic early on in the season, although this will probably warm up in the next coming weeks. The reason why we don't look out in the Eastern Atlantic because the 26 degrees Celsius line, as you can see, still does not encompass, in general, most of the Western and Central, or most of the MDR. The Western MDR, obviously, in the 26 degrees Celsius line, but it's still not warm enough for tropical development in the Eastern Atlantic right now. And that's why we don't look at development early on in the season in the Eastern Atlantic. It's once again towards the Western Atlantic where you can see we have much warmer sea surface temperatures. In fact, this is the 28 degrees Celsius line here. It encompasses the entire Caribbean and also a little bit of the Southern Gulf and the Gulf in general too. Warming up, we're almost there with the 26 degrees Celsius line reaching the entire Gulf. The shelf waters are a little bit colder right now. That'll probably warm up in the coming weeks. But the Gulf is almost warm enough too for development, and even off the southeast coast with the Gulf Stream, you can see the 26 degrees Celsius line kind of beginning to slowly make its way through. And then in the Eastern Pacific, you can see as well the Eastern Pacific is very steamy with sea surface temperatures right off the coast of Mexico here. 30 degrees Celsius, so definitely warm enough for development. And as I'll show you in a little bit, we might have actually something to take advantage of that. Not in the near future, but potentially as we head towards the end of the month. we might have something to watch in the Pacific. But the Pacific is definitely warm enough for development. And it makes sense as to why the Eastern Pacific kind of begins on May 15th. You could definitely see why we're definitely warm enough for development in the Pacific already. Let's take a look, though, obviously, really quickly looking at the tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center, just to see what's happening, or to see what's not happening right now within the next 48 hours and in the next 7 days across the Atlantic. So everything is quiet. And in the Eastern Pacific as well, nothing is happening in the next 7 days, and even going towards the Central Pacific, nothing there as well. Although with the Central Pacific, that really nothing happens here till really July. So no need to worry about the Central Pacific. But in the Eastern Pacific, nothing happening over the next 7 days. But as I'll show you in a little bit, kind of been hinting at it throughout the video, but I promise you I'll show you in a little bit. We might have to watch beyond 7 days once we get towards the day 10 time frame here in the Eastern Pacific for potentially some development. Let's really quickly, though, take a look at the GFS model in the Atlantic. Just going to kind of really quickly run it out through the next week. And as you can see, nothing of any sort of major development happens in the Atlantic. So let's get rid of that. Let's go to the Eastern Pacific, and let's see, over the next 7 days, does anything happen in the Eastern Pacific? No, nothing in the Eastern Pacific as well. A little bit of energy here that's near Central America, and several days ago this was a concern of potentially something developing in the Eastern Pacific around this time. Well, that's obviously not going to happen, and obviously there's nothing major going on in the Pacific for the next 7 days. But notice here, if you look towards Central America, you could see that there is definitely quite a bit of vorticity. Nothing really organized. Well, the GFS has some sort of something trying to consolidate here. What is that, near Panama? Although the GFS does have a sort of convective bias where it tries to spin things up, whatever. You can see that there's generally some vorticity near Central America. And let me really quickly, I'm going to do this now, but I don't do this often. Let's take this past the day 7 time frame and up towards day 10. You can see that there's some sort of vorticity that kind of consolidates near Central America and then kind of makes its way into the Eastern Pacific. And then you can see we start getting some sort of development to occur. And the Euro also shows this as well. Well, why is this happening? Why are we seeing all of this vorticity begin to pile up near Central America? Well, if you look at the velocity potential, and this is, by the way, courtesy of the Euro, this is the EPS velocity potential. Notice, especially as we head towards the end of the month, so this is May 28th here. So really quickly, just to go over, if you don't know how to read this map, this is the black line which represents the current day. So this is May 16th. So this is actually updated as of yesterday. The latest update, the latest map for today doesn't come out till this afternoon. And obviously it's not this afternoon, so we're still stuck with yesterday's map. But this black line represents the latest, what's going on currently. Everything that's up here represents the past, so this is all what's happened in the past, and below this black line is the future forecast. And notice as we head towards late May and into early June, you notice we have these greens and these blues, or I guess that is blue, beginning to pop up where? Near Central America, and that is coincides as we head towards the end of May. We have a bunch of this vorticity here near Central America beginning to pile up. So pretty much what the setup will be is, as typical in the early season, we'll have what looks like a Central American gyre, which will set up, and that's obviously prevalent with these velocity potential, rising motion near Central America as we head towards the end of the month. Bottom line, things are going to get favorable for the Western Hemisphere as a whole, and it makes sense as to why the models are beginning to show development, at least in the Eastern Pacific. And then obviously this rising motion lasts into pretty much the first 2 weeks of June. So we might get development in the Eastern Pacific, maybe as we head towards the end of the month, but maybe as we head into the beginning of next month. Obviously, the Atlantic will be more favorable, so maybe we might have something to talk about in the Atlantic too, in the not so distant future as we begin the hurricane season next month. We'll see, though, nothing popping up yet on the models, although we are seeing stuff pop up in the Eastern Pacific, a sign of generally our neck of the woods here in the Western Hemisphere as a whole, because, I mean, if you really think about it, the Eastern Pacific as a whole, especially, going to this day 9-10 time frame when you could clearly see something consolidating on the GFS. And by the way, the GFS is not the only model showing it. But what I'm generally trying to get at is this is still at the same longitude, not latitude, of the Gulf of Mexico, and generally right near Central America here in the Eastern Pacific is generally in the same longitude as the Gulf and even portions of the Northwestern Caribbean. So we're seeing some development being favored now in the Eastern Pacific, but this general area of the Western Hemisphere will be favored. And as especially we're getting towards the end of the month and we're starting to get into June, we know damn well that the Atlantic starts becoming more favored for activity, especially in the Western Caribbean and the Gulf. That's the climatology favored areas for development in the Atlantic in the early season. Bottom line is, we might need to watch the tropics, especially as we head towards the end of the month and the beginning of next month, for things to start getting interesting. We'll go more into depth, though, once the time comes and we start actually seeing signals, at least in the Atlantic. But wanted to show you in the Eastern Pacific, it's already popping up, and it's definitely a sign of things becoming more favorable. Really quickly, though, before we end, here's the latest severe weather outlook from the Storm Prediction Center. Lots of severe weather going to happen over the next several days. We had a lot of severe weather yesterday. There was a moderate risk for portions of the Mid-South and the mid-Mississippi River Valley, and as a result, we had quite a few devastating tornadoes yesterday. Last night, I remember there was one in Kentucky that caused a mass casualty event. So praying for everybody that's been affected by tornadoes yesterday. And it looks like we're going to get more in the way of severe weather today. There's an enhanced risk for portions of northeastern Texas, and there's a slight risk that encompasses, in general, parts of the central southern United States. The tornado risk not as high today. It's at a 5% chance, but there is a wind threat and a hail threat that's actually pretty significant. We have up to a 30% chance, and then a hatched area beyond that, generally encompassing Texas and Oklahoma and also some of Arkansas as well. Here's the day 2 outlook. Severe weather continues, and this is for tomorrow. More focus over the southern plains, northern Texas, and then into Kansas, with an enhanced risk over northern Oklahoma and I think this is Kansas, and then this is Nebraska. Actually, never mind. But an enhanced risk for tomorrow. Pretty significant tornado risk, and this is for northern Oklahoma and Kansas. We have a 10% chance with the hatched area, so we might get some pretty strong tornadoes tomorrow as well. And then there's the wind and hail threat, which is also significant tomorrow. And then day 3, severe weather continues for portions of the plains, and then as we head into the Midwest, and then it gets active still into the day 4 time frame. This whole weather system then moves east, and this is for day 4. We already have a 30% chance, which pretty much equates to an enhanced risk for severe weather, and this is now getting into the Mid-South and the Deep South. So the bottom line is severe weather is going to stay active over the next several weeks, and then eventually, I think, as we head into past next week, hopefully it should die down. It's going to get very cold in the eastern half of the United States. I know that for sure. So I guess maybe that might be a sign of things beginning to slowly quiet down once we get past this upcoming week and, of course, this weekend. And then beyond that, we'll probably be on the doorstep into June, and it will be hurricane season. I'm going to continue to say that just to hammer the fact that we're really getting close to hurricane season now. And if you are, and I mentioned this past Thursday, or I think I mentioned it last week, if you've not prepared yet for hurricane season, take the time to do so now. Luck always favors the prepared. Even if you are not generally in a major hurricane risk area, which that is, I mean, that doesn't really exist because the entire coastline, even up to the northeast, counts as a hurricane risk area. Maybe, places like the mid-Atlantic and the northeast aren't as affected as often as maybe the Gulf Coast or Florida, but we still get stuff from time to time. And always be prepared, always have a hurricane plan. Once again, luck favors the prepared. That's it for this week. Or at least that's it for today, though. I'll be back sometime this Thursday or this upcoming week on Thursday because NOAA is releasing their hurricane forecast on Thursday. So we'll go over that when that comes out. Other than that, though, there's not much else going on for now, although that might change over the next week to 10 days, at least in the Eastern Pacific. We'll monitor that, though. Thanks for watching today's video. Stay safe. If you enjoyed what you saw today, I always appreciate if you like, comment, subscribe, share this video with family and friends, turn on the notification bell so you can get whenever I upload videos the moment I upload them. Stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we will talk again very soon.